straight away on this parent webinar for supporting children with additional needs at home during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I'm very, very glad to be able to say that I am also joined by my colleague, Dr. Ola Ahmed, and Ola and I, after I finish this short presentation, will have a bit of a discussion, a bit of a chit chat, and we'll be open to take questions from any of you who have questions that you'd like to ask. With that in mind, I will speak for about 30 minutes, probably actually less than that, hopefully, on the area, as I said, of supporting your children with additional needs at home. What I will look at in this presentation briefly is looking at what I call the just right level of support for your child or children. I'll look briefly at its structure and routine and why that's important. I'll also look briefly at what we call emotion regulation, and very, very briefly I'll look at self-care and what I call being a one good adult. After that then, Dr. Ola and myself, as I said, will be open for a question and answer and a discussion for about 30 minutes or so to just chat ourselves, but to take any questions that you may have. What I would please ask all of you to do is, if you have questions or comments that you want to share, please type those in the chat box rather than sharing those verbally or using the audio button. Please type those in the chat box, and Dr. Ola and myself will then see those questions and can answer them through conversation, but via your questions through chat. The other thing I would please ask you to do is to keep your mics or your audio on mute during the brief presentation, just because it can lead to feedback and it can be a little bit disruptive. So with that in mind, I'll get started. Now, just for those of you who have joined us, I'd like you to just think for a few minutes as to why you are here. What is your reason for being here? Perhaps you're a parent of a child who has some different or additional needs. Perhaps you're here out of general interest and you want to learn something new, or perhaps you're here with a specific question. I'd ask you just at this point to take a few moments to think of why it is you are here and what you're hoping to gain from being here. And if there is a specific question you have in mind, to either you can write it now in the chat, or perhaps you want to just bear that in mind as we go through this presentation. So you as an individual are likely to be here for a specific reason, but us together, I believe we're here for similar reasons. And that reason for us being here is to understand that we are seeking and hoping to provide equity rather than equality for our children who are learning from home at the moment. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at these two images, it shows you the difference clearly between equality and equity. We're not here to show equal support to all children at this time, because if we were to do that, we would be looking at this image on the left. We're here, and you're here as parents, because you want to support your children to provide equity to them. What that means is you want to meet the needs of your child or children where they are at, in order to provide them with the best support you can at this time for them to flourish and reach their potential in terms of learning, in terms of behavior, in terms of any additional strengths and needs that they may have. We're here to be inclusive and to be equitable. So for a moment, again, for you as a parent, I'd like you to just think right now, when you're attempting to be equitable, inclusive, and to support the needs of your child at home, are you finding that your child is more like the child on the left or the child on the right? And I'm sure for some of you, the left could be the case, that your child is flourishing at home, that home is where they feel at ease and they enjoy the structure of home, and they're doing very well with their home learning, better maybe even than in school. For others, however, I'm sure that you're seeing more of the child on the right in your own homes, a child who might be struggling, who might be bored, who might lack in motivation, and who might be finding it all a bit overwhelming. So what can we do to help, whether your child is on the left or on the right? Well, what we can do to help, and what I feel very, very strongly about, is where we have children who have needs, we need to meet those needs at what we call the just right level. And the just right level is essentially like Goldilocks. Goldilocks, who had her porridge, and the porridge needed to be just right. So not too cold and not too hot. And this is exactly the concept that we use when we talk about needs of children in relation to their learning. Their learning should always be delivered at the just right level. And there is no time where this is more important than right now, where you as parents are delivering and supporting that learning. So with that in mind, I would urge you, before I go any further with this presentation, to ensure that you have some communication or some contact with your school and with your child to ensure that the delivery of the material you're providing them with, or the school is providing you with, is at your child's level. Whether that is the level of the class, whether that's a level below or above that, that is the level of your child is the just right level. If your child is expected by their teacher or by you as a parent to work beyond what their level of competency is at this point, that's not the just right level. And they will not succeed or be motivated if it is not delivered at that level. So this just right level that I talk about, when we talk about Goldilocks and her porridge, the just right level is the porridge that's not too cold and it's not too hot. It's just there in the middle. So it's that red image on the left. And when we talk about that in learning terms, without honing in too much on the jargon, but that just right porridge is for learners, or in this case, your children, it's what we call the zone of proximal development. So in essence, it's what your child can do with some guidance. If you find that your child is struggling with all of the learning that they're expected to do at this time, and they cannot do any of it independently, well then that's like the porridge that's too cold. It's not right for them. And it should not be expected that they would then continue with that type of learning. But similarly, if your child is able to do all of the work being delivered to them with absolutely no support and is finding it too easy, again, that is not the just right level. What we want before we go any further in supporting our children is to ensure that the level of delivery is the just right level, like the just right porridge. So as I say, if this is ensured and if you're in communication with schools that the delivery of material or the material being shared with the child is at their level, then that is the first and foremost crucial point in supporting your children at this time. Everything else I will say beyond this point is secondary to that. And everything else I say beyond this point will be almost, you can put it to the wayside and you can forget about it, because if the material itself is not at your child's level, then all of the other things we'll speak about will be, you might as well forget about them. So please, 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 if nothing else, ensure that you contact your schools and that you share with them if the material your child is partaking in and is learning is too hard or too easy. It needs to be just right. So just to think about, or give you an opportunity to think about what just right is, I'd like you to take a moment and try and read this paragraph and see if you can make any sense of this. As you're reading this, let it be known that this is with you knowing 70% more than likely of the words here. So just take a moment and read this. So some of you might still be reading this, and others of you may have finished it. But what I'm sure you will have realized or discovered is that it doesn't make a lot of sense. So in essence, this is like the too hot porridge. It's not at the just right level. The just right level is the level whereby your child would know about, in reading, for example, about 93% of words. And the other words are ones that you would support them with. So we can see here that that we struggle to understand things when we're expected to do it independently when it's too difficult. Now read this one. It's the same story, but this time you should recognize about 93% of words. And this will tell you this is the just right level. So you will understand the gist of it, but maybe with a little bit more support, you would understand it all. So this is an example of the just right level. Have a read of this and see how much more you understand. So again, some of you may have finished reading this and others of you might still be reading it. But that was just to show you an example of the importance of ensuring that the support we give our children is support given at their level, but also that the material that they're engaging with is at their level. So you could see very clearly the difference between information that is too difficult and above their level, and information that is just right with a bit of modelling that they can understand and that they can get the gist of independently. That is absolutely crucial before we go any further today. So please bear that in mind going forward in supporting the needs of your child at home. Now, another thing that I'd like to touch on briefly today is when we talk about supporting the needs of our children at home, one thing that we hear often, but that I can't emphasize enough, is the importance of having routines and structure, particularly for children with additional needs. And those needs of your children could be any number of a variety of different things. But what we do know is that by setting plans, having schedules, particularly visual schedules, and using a specific time frame can be extremely helpful for children. So for example, the idea of making a visual schedule that begins at maybe 9 a.m. and finishes at 1 p.m. with specific time slots and specific tasks in each time slot can provide predictability, routine, and structure for children. With this in mind, these tasks and timeframes can vary. We can provide choice for our children, and by providing choice for our children, we are giving them a sense of ownership of their learning. So I'm sure that for many of you as parents at the moment, you're finding that your children's motivation is waning. And as a way of trying to increase that motivation or their willingness to learn, by giving them ownership of their own learning, you're supporting their sense of responsibility and accountability. So for example, when using a schedule, a visual schedule, by allowing choice within that your child can choose for example, what they would do, whether it would be English or maths at 9 until 10 or 10 till 11, or the time at which they take their break. By providing them with those choices and allowing them to make a choice within those tasks can be extremely helpful for children. As well as that, if your child has additional needs and they're struggling to sit, to attend, to engage with teaching and learning, and you are struggling to know how to support them, one thing that I would strongly advise is to break tasks down to individual steps. So for example, a task like open your maths book on page 15 and do questions 1 to 3 might sound simple to some of us. But if your child is struggling with learning or with language or with a variety of other different areas of need, that is far too much for them to take on. So I would suggest that you deliver one instruction at a time to your child. Give an instruction, follow it up with a visual reminder or cue, and give your child a chance to process that instruction and to follow it. you can then add another step to the instruction. As well as that, when it comes to routines and structures, what's extremely important and what I would urge you to do at home, though I know it's difficult, is to organize a specific space. Ideally, that space should be distraction-free, and ideally, it should be a space that's clean and that's clear. This is, and we know that this does make a difference when it comes to learning and when it comes to being able to sit and attend. Also, the use of timers can be helpful for children, particularly children who struggle with motivation towards tasks in school. By knowing when they're going to start and when they're going to stop can be helpful. And they also, if that child is struggling to become motivated, can be praised and rewarded for their efforts if they do attempt to attend for that period of time. Again, if your child has attention difficulties, I would suggest that you use the timer for a short period of time initially, reward them if they manage to adhere to that length of time, and then over time try and elongate the period of time during which they can attend. But it is extremely important and critical to continue and maintain their motivation that you do reward their efforts. Again, a very central part to supporting children with any variety of needs at home is to provide them with visual supports, which I'll speak about briefly in a moment. And the one other part of it that I would encourage you to do at this stage is to provide them with regular breaks. So whether your child is struggling with attention, with a sense of rigidity, with social communication, learning, any number of different needs, by providing them with regular breaks so that they can have downtime and time for relaxation will be important. So when we were speaking about visual supports, having visual supports for children with any number of different areas of strength and need can make a huge difference. We as adults use visual supports all of the time. Think about the visual supports that you have in your life. I know for me, I use any number of visual supports on a daily basis. I use reminders on my phone. I use Post-its in my home. I use different tabs on my computer as reminders. I use YouTube for clarity when I'm unsure of something, for that visual input. I look at the images in books to try and clarify different concepts. I use schedules and timetables in my own work. So what do you use as an adult? Think about some of the visual supports you use in your life. As you're thinking about this, I'm sure you're realizing that actually you use more visual supports and aids than you might have realized or thought before. But we know that we use them as adults all the time. So with that in mind, it's even more important for children to have those visual supports. And sometimes we can forget that. So for our children, they may have access to visual supports in the school that they may or may not have access to at home. So I would urge you, if you have not done so already, to contact your school, whether it's the child's class teacher or a support teacher, and ask them if there are visual supports that your child may have used in school that you are unaware of. For some children, having visual supports like a simple laminated card with the word change on it, or break, or wait can be extremely helpful. If your child struggles with attention or is impulsive, having a little card saying wait that you can show them or place in front of them as they're becoming inattentive can help them. And it can help them as a reminder to sit and wait until the timer has finished. Having an actual concrete timer, whether it's digital or otherwise, again, is a nice visual aid to keep your child on task. The idea of a break card, whereby either you can show the child when it's time or coming up to time for a break, or where you give the child ownership of their own breaks, and that they can hand you a break card when they feel they're fatigued or they're in need of a break after having completed some work, can help some children. And similarly, a change card. If your child struggles with change, well, in advance of change happening, that maybe they're changing to a different subject or topic during the day, or finishing from schoolwork into relaxation mode, by giving them something as simple as a change card can be a way of reminding them that change is coming and it helps to prepare for it. These are just some ideas. There are any number of different visual aids that can be used for different children depending on their areas of strength and need. More visual aids for perhaps older children or children who might struggle with initiating tasks, particularly written tasks, are things like graphic organizers and mind maps. And I'm aware that some of you here will be familiar with these concepts already. But again, if you find that your child is struggling to start a task or to structure or plan written tasks, graphic organizers, checklists, simple templates where they can tick off what is being asked of them as they're going can be helpful. Mind maps can also be a nice use of visual supports and structuring writing. Again, Dr. Ola and I will discuss these in more depth in a few moments, and we can give lots of resources and ideas of websites to look into these in more depth. I'm just skimming the surface very much on lots of these different resources and ideas. So we've spoken briefly about the importance of visual supports. But even with visual supports and with structures, your child might be becoming upset or frustrated at home, or maybe they're struggling with boredom or isolation. So with that in mind, what can be done to support your child's emotion regulation? And when I say emotion regulation, what I mean is your child's ability to control their emotions or to help themselves to become or remain calm even when they're feeling internally frustrated or upset. So perhaps your child is like one of the children here, or perhaps your child is already managing to regulate themselves well. But a few little ideas as to how maybe you can support your child's emotion regulation are shown here. So first of all, when we talk about emotion regulation, what I'd like to say and mention first and foremost is that you as a parent can model, provided that you're in a calm, safe, secure place yourself, you are the best person to model to them the type of behavior that you are seeking in them, but also methods of remaining calm when they're feeling upset. So a way that you can do this is simply by having conversations with them on a daily basis. And maybe coming home, or coming into the kitchen, for example, and saying something like, "Oh, Mohammed, today I'm feeling frustrated. And I'm feeling frustrated because I didn't manage to speak to the person I wanted to on the phone, and now I'm delayed with my work." And you can use a particular tone of voice and maybe even show, like in the images here, a visual of somebody who's feeling frustrated or irritated. By modeling emotions and by expressing them like this, you're supporting your child to better understand their emotions and hopefully for them to be able to express theirs in a clear way. Also, by simply being empathic towards your child and supporting your child in terms of their own emotions by listening to them and being a trusted adult, you will support them to feel that they can engage with you and that they hopefully can confide in you. So by being a listening ear and a trusted adult, that is in and of itself support for your child to regulate their emotions. I've put two images here, however, because if you've tried these things and perhaps you're still struggling, these are two of many different visuals that you can find on the internet to support your child with their emotion regulation. And the idea of these is what we call the incredible 5-point scale. And these are two different versions of the same idea. But what it is essentially it's providing your child with a different means rather than verbal means to try and express how they're feeling. Because we know that many children with a variety of needs might struggle verbally to express themselves. So by talking through with them a visual like this, which again Dr. Ola and I can explain in more depth in a few moments, you can support them to be able to name a color, a number, or to point to a particular visual face that helps them to maybe express their emotions if they struggle to do so verbally. So for example, if I'm having a day where I'm frustrated in work, rather than me trying to explain to somebody why I'm frustrated, if I can simply say, "I'm at a 3 today," well then one of my colleagues might understand that I'm frustrated and can support me, or can suggest, perhaps again on a chart, some methods that I can use to calm myself, to bring myself back to what we call a 1, which is a more calm or content place. So in essence, the incredible 5-point scale is a method of allowing your child to use numbers or colours to express their emotions, rather than having to use verbal means. And you can talk through with them, and again, Dr. Ola and I will explain this, you can talk through with them various emotions that you might associate with different numbers. So generally a number 5 would be what we would call out of control emotions, maybe of anger or of upset or of anxiety. And then once your child is at a point where they can name different numbers and different emotions associated with those numbers, you can then go on to talking with them about methods that they can use to try and calm themselves or regulate themselves, perhaps to bring themselves back down to numbers 1 or 2. But again, using visual means of doing this can be extremely helpful for children with different needs. This is another example of the same thing, but perhaps for children who might struggle with the visual field and where the other images had too much content, or children who simply want a simpler way of expressing themselves. Just as, again, it's the same idea, but just a little simpler version of it. And then when we talk about having a different variety of methods for calming down or supporting your child to remain calm or regulate themselves, again, having a visual of different calm down strategies, as we call them, can be helpful. So perhaps the image on the right is one example of, and I know this is a written means of doing it, but you could have this or just visuals of different calm down strategies when your child feels that they're at a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. Or again, the visual on the left is one example of many that we have of maybe practicing deep breathing. But having it as a visual reminder in the home as a method for calming down and supporting your child to regulate their emotions can be helpful for some children. Now, finally, and again, there are many things that I would like to speak about in terms of supporting your children with different needs at home, but that's what Dr. Ola and I will open the floor to for discussion now in a moment. But the one other thing I would just like to touch on briefly before I finish the presentation is the idea that you as a parent or as an adult need to mind yourself in order to support your child. And that's the idea of being what we call a one good adult or a trusted adult to your child. If you are attending this webinar this morning, you're doing so out of interest. And likely that interest is for your child, that you want to support your child. With that in mind, you want to be that one good adult or a trusted adult to your child. You want them to be able to confide in you, to be able to open up to you, and you want to be able to support them when they are in need. However, in order to be that person for your child, it is absolutely crucial that you are in a place of content and calm yourself, that you can regulate your own emotions, and that you are able to use your own means, perhaps visual means, to support yourself. But that you need to be at a point where you are caring for yourself and giving yourself time for you. So this image of a battery is the idea that when your battery is full, when you are looking after yourself, then you are absolutely going to be in a better position to look after your child or children than when your own battery or your own energy levels are depleted. If you do not and are not looking after yourself and your own self-care, your energy will deplete and your child will not have full access to you that they may need or that you may wish them to have. I've spoken in depth about parent self-care and the importance of this. So again, I can touch on it during the Q&A, but otherwise I would urge you to look at some of our other webinars or recordings on this area, because without looking after yourself, you simply cannot be the best support to your child at their times of need. And finally, if you feel that you or your child is struggling at the moment in relation to education, the work that's being delivered, the expectations that teachers have of them or that you have of them, please just remember this and take a moment to read this and to sit with it. take your time, think about it, and consider it. Thank you. Now I'll invite Dr. Ola, if she is available and if she's still present, to join me, and I'll just put on my camera, Ola, and we will open the floor to if any questions that people have or comments that people have. But also, I'd just like to introduce Dr. Ola first of all. And Ola, I'm mindful that I know I've touched on a few very basic ideas and concepts just now, but I'm also aware that there are huge numbers of different things that you and I have spoken about and could speak about for hours on end that different children will have needs in. So before I go any further, is there anything in particular that you want to mention or name at this point before I start looking at some of the questions we have?
Thanks, Mary. Firstly, I wanted to say as a really lovely summary that you've presented of lots of very different topics and strategies that parents can consider. And as you said, obviously with the short time that we have with the participants today, we are talking sort of broad, sort of high level concepts. And we would definitely encourage parents, if they're feeling the need for more detailed input, to reach out to a professional for that. I can see some questions coming through our meeting chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of those before our hour is up. I did want to say, as I was listening to you talk, I think I was thinking a lot about one of the issues that comes up in sessions with parents a lot for me in these last few weeks, and that's about managing our expectations. So you've given parents all these wonderful strategies and things to consider, but I think I've found in my discussions with parents that those parents who are really feeling the pressure to be doing absolutely everything they can and setting quite high expectations for themselves, but also expecting a lot of their children, are then sort of feeling the emotional toll of those high expectations. And I think I've been encouraging parents a lot and sort of talking about the need to be kind and sort of forgiving of ourselves, and catching kind of perfectionistic or really high expectations we may set, which may be actually setting us up to fail. So I think it's about striking a balance, isn't it? That, you know, we want to identify the support needs our children may have and have a think about what we can do using some of these resources you've discussed and resources parents will already have, but also being careful not to expect perfection, or not to expect that, you know, some weeks will be harder, other weeks will be easier. And I think if we can have that sort of context or background as we're supporting our children, we're all going to be better off for it. So
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really valid point, Ola, and I think that, you know, as you say, having those expectations not only of our children but also of ourselves, and not expecting ourselves to be all things to all people all of the time as well. I think that's a really important point that you make. But also, you know, the idea of just prioritizing that. I know there can be a push from a lot of schools at the moment to cover lots and lots of content. And, you know, when I was mentioning about the just right level, it may or may not be at the level of ability of your child, but still this expectation to cover it. And absolutely. I think, you know, given the unprecedented times that we're living in, there is I suppose the importance in us as individuals prioritizing and realizing that maybe it's not all about covering every piece of work. I'll prioritize a few subjects, but also that there are other areas in our life and in our family life that we need to prioritize, like play and so on.
Absolutely. And I've been talking to parents about giving themselves permission, right, to prioritize other things. It may be prioritizing the behavioral and emotional support needs of their children over, for example, completing 100% of things set by school at the moment, or within all the schoolwork, prioritizing those things that they feel are most important for their children, if actually it's not reasonable to expect to get through everything on that particular day or that particular week. So yeah, all important things I think for parents to keep in mind. I'm mindful we've got a few questions coming through, Mary.
Yeah. Will I read out the first one, or I'll read it out? And yeah, I think we'll go through those questions, and then if we have time for more chat at the end, we'll do so. So thank you everybody who has contributed to the questions. They're very, very valid and they're very interesting questions. So the first one here is, And one person has made a comment first saying a lot of good information, so thank you for that. And the first question is it okay to allow the kids to play a video game or watch videos during a break? And then in brackets, during the school time.
Yeah.
So, Ola, do you want to
Sure.
start that and I'll chip in?
Believe it or not, I've been asked this question a lot over the last few weeks, and
yeah,
I think I can see a similar sort of question being asked right at the end of our questions there. And I think being online and doing all this distance learning has meant that children who previously maybe had very particular screen time privileges are now using those devices more than they normally would.
Yeah.
And so understandably, that kind of the boundaries that parents may have in place for their children in the past are having to be blurred a little bit at the moment. I would say in terms of allowing children breaks and what they do with those breaks, I think it's really important that we can be flexible and sort of gauge the needs of your child at that particular time or on that particular day. I think I see some children in the clinic where being on YouTube or playing a game is the only thing that really attracts their attention, and it's very much a big reinforcer for them. And I would say to that extent, it might be okay to permit that kind of activity during a break. I would say though, and I'm sure parents or the parent asking this question may have found this, that transitioning back to schoolwork after playing 10 minutes of a really preferred game may then be quite challenging for some children. And it depends on your child and their needs. So if a transition away from a really preferred activity is going to actually be a source of frustration or is going to limit their sort of ability to refocus their attention to their work, that may be a good reason to avoid that particular activity during those shorter breaks during the day. And it may be about finding something else, particularly something that involves some movement. So getting up from their seat, being in a different space for a few minutes. And then maybe using those kind of games and things they really prefer to do as a reward for completing the work that you've discussed together for the day. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Mary?
Yeah, and I think that I think that's a really valid point. I think as well the other, I suppose there's such an emphasis on screen time at the moment, and I think the lines are really blurred for so many parents. This is something I'm hearing a lot from parents, where the lines are so blurred between using a device for schoolwork and then using that same device for gaming, and then trying to create those boundaries using the same device. And I know that's me slightly digressing, but that's a very real issue for a lot of parents as well at the moment. But I think just going back to this particular point, another option for some parents, and again, very mindful that it's so individual, might be just similar to what you were saying, Ola, might be the idea of something like a choice board, so that during the children's breaks, that they may have a choice between 4 or 5 different activities that they can engage in during the breaks, so that maybe use of a game or of screen time might be one choice that they have that day. So that at least then they're taking ownership of how they use the break, but they know that if they use it this once for this 10 minutes, that's that use of gaming done for today or for that break time, but they have chosen it, so they're taking accountability for that. And again, as you were rightly saying, that will work for some children, it won't for others. You as a parent will be the expert on your own child, but these are just a few ideas. Now, Ola, there's something after happening to my screen here, so I can't see any of the remaining questions, but if you wouldn't mind calling them out, then we can maybe chat about them.
Sure. So we've spoken a little bit about screen time. There is just one question about accessing previous webinars. Mary, maybe you'll have an answer to this.
Yes. Okay. So I think I had seen that question actually, and then my screen went funny. But yeah, yes, apologies. I had tried to get that message out there. There unfortunately was an IT glitch last week. So I know quite a number of people were trying to attend our parent self-care webinar. We ran it twice last week, because of the glitch that unfortunately we encountered last Thursday. We are going to run that parent self-care webinar again this coming Thursday. The proposed time will be 3 p.m. again on Microsoft Teams, but we will confirm that hopefully either today or tomorrow, and we will share a poster on social media and through the different networks again on that. I'm also aware that quite a few people have looked for a recording of that parent self-care webinar, And I know our IT team are in the process of putting that together and sharing that again across our website and networks. So hopefully that will be accessible to parents who also want to avail of it. But again, anybody who is interested and who might have missed the webinar last Thursday, we will be running it again this Thursday. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mary. I think we've covered all the questions that have come through. Just a final question from Hannah about whether it's possible to do this post-Ramadan. So I would say, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are working on having recorded webinars uploaded so that people can access them at the time that suits them.
Yeah, exactly. Just for clinical and operational reasons, in terms of us facilitating it live, it will need to be this Thursday simply because of, as I say, clinical and operational reasons. However, the recording will be accessible. I'm wondering, I know there was another thing that I was hoping to discuss, and I know it's something both you and I are very passionate about, that, and for parents here, it's something that will be of interest to some and maybe not so much to others, but it's the idea of going back to what you were saying, you know, the prioritizing both our needs and the needs of our children at the moment, and trying not to become overwhelmed by expectations of schools. And that's the idea of play and the importance of play and emphasizing play with our kids at this time. I know both you and I have a lot to say on the topic, so is there anything you want to say, or any comments or thoughts you have on that at the moment?
Well, I can talk about play for a long time. It's something I'm really passionate about in the context of not only kind of opportunities for parents and children to connect and to bond, but we know so much in the research about how powerful play is in the overall development of children, and not just young children, even children as they get older. Obviously, the kind of play children enjoy changes a lot depending on their developmental level, but there is sort of a plethora of research that shows how useful it can be in terms of the emotional, social, cognitive, behavioral development of children. And I think, you know, a lot of parents are probably sort of scratching their heads and sort of thinking about new ways to keep children entertained at home, and maybe running out of ideas, or sort of finding that old routines are now becoming a little tedious over the course of this sort of lockdown. And I think play is a good place to start when you're trying to generate new ideas. You know, I've been speaking to parents about thinking about, you know, what was life like for them before tablets and computers and so on, and what kind of games did they enjoy as children, and trying to integrate those sorts of things in play. So coming up with novel ideas to engage their children through play is a good way to introduce something new as part of the routines that we're having to develop at the moment. And I would say that it's really important when playing to try as much as possible to give the lead to the child. And we know so much that play that's directed by a child goes back to some of the points you were talking about, Mary, the importance of helping children feel some control, have some choice in what's happening, but it really also sets a scene for creativity and problem solving, and for you to get to know your child when you see the kind of direction that they take play in. So it's really important, where possible, to sort of sit back and let them be the boss for a change, and just try and enjoy your child and your time with them when you're playing together.
Yeah, and I think I couldn't agree more, and I think you've put it very, very nicely there, Ola. And I think just, you know, I think often as adults we underestimate the power of play, and how it, as you rightly say, brings together so many elements of a child's learning in one very informal, unstructured context. And just because it's not a formal classroom setting does not mean that there's any less learning in it. In fact, I would argue the opposite. And, you know, even if, as you said, if we think back to our own childhoods, and we think of even young children that we see in infancy, and their sense of wonder of the world, and their innate desire by most children to play or to engage in some form of play. It's a very real, natural way of learning and discovering the world around us. So I think, again, you know, considering that as a priority, or at least as part of learning for your child at this point, while you have the capacity and ability to engage in that at home, where usually you wouldn't, I think it's a really, really, really valuable use of time, particularly if you find your child's motivation waning towards schoolwork.
Yeah, and I would just add there, Mary, that I think play is a great context to help develop particular skills. So for those parents who have children with language differences or sort of social interaction differences, play can be a really great opportunity rather than those sort of really structured learning environments. It's a kind of naturally motivating and enjoyable setting to promote language and to promote some back and forth sort of interactions with your children. So sitting back and commenting on what they're doing and naming things they're playing with and describing the actions that you see, all of that kind of language that you're introducing to play is a great way for your child's language and sort of interaction skills to develop as you're doing something very simple like playing with some Lego or playing with some Play-Doh, whatever it may be. So really, really great informal context for a lot of other learning.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, and just one last point I want to make on play, I think, is as well, if you as a parent have observed, perhaps, you know, and I don't know what the strengths and needs of your individual children are, but for example, if a child might have some developmental delays or difficulties, if you have noticed as a parent that your child struggles with play in a social manner and they struggle to interact with other children, they're very much solitary in their play, by providing them with that informal almost structure by you being present at the moment, that can be a really nice opportunity to provide a safe, comfortable space for them to learn those skills, as you've said, Ola, and to maybe move from being kind of solitary or alone in their play to develop up through, because there are different stages of play that we won't speak about today, but it can be a nice method of helping them informally to feel at ease, because the likelihood is they'll feel comfortable and safe in your presence, maybe more so than they would around peers that they don't know as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mary. So we've had some really some nice feedback. I'm glad that people are finding some of these tips and things helpful. And I wanted to take it as a chance to thank you for your questions and thank you for joining Mary and I. It's been really good fun, and we hope we can have you back for webinars in the future.
Yeah, and I think we're hoping to do one on Facebook Live, all going well, on Wednesday at 3:30 to 4:30. That's the plan. So, and that's what has been shared. So if you feel that you would either like to attend again, or maybe you have different questions you'd like to bring to our attention, or maybe you'd like to share this webinar with your networks, we would urge you to join on Wednesday. And similarly, if you feel that there are some things we've touched on or not touched on today that you have further questions or queries about, or you'd like some support with, please feel free to contact the clinic, and we are absolutely here to help at the moment. We're open and available for appointments and for support, so please feel free to contact us, and Ola, myself, or any of the other clinicians, I'm sure that are available, would be very happy to help with any queries you might have. So thank you for joining us, and we hopefully will see some of you again in the future for more webinars. And Ola, thank you so much for giving me your time today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. It's been nice chatting to you, Mary.
Likewise, and see you soon, hopefully.
See you soon. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.